deserve.
Huh? Better than you deserve. Yeah. Well, as long as most of us fit into that category, we're okay.
I think that's true for most everybody. Not
Exactly.
everybody, but most.
Yeah. So, well, listen, thank you so much for agreeing to join me today to chat about nothing in particular, and but what's called on the podcast or the YouTube channel Surgeons' Lives, but the strap line to that is stuff that matters, which is a little bit more than just how many papers you wrote or how many operations you did. And you know, in these interviews, I've been talking to people from around the world in every different specialty, young and older, and et cetera, and everywhere in between. Um, um, but you're my first person who has spent a career largely overseas. So I'm hoping it'll be very interesting for people. What I normally ask people to do, and if it's okay with you, I'll ask you to do it, is to start us off with the words that start with "I was born in." I don't mean what year, by the way.
I don't
um,
mind sharing that either, but that's another thing. So I was born in the 40s, and my dad was a Baptist preacher in Donaldson, Tennessee, and I was born in Nashville. Uh, I grew up different places. We were in Donaldson for a while. We were in Kentucky for a while. We were in Knoxville, Tennessee for a while, but we moved to Jackson, Mississippi in 53 in the third grade, and I finished through high school there in 62. I went to Vanderbilt for 4 years undergraduate, 3.5, and then I was at Vanderbilt Medical School, finished in the 70s, 1970. I was manager and trainer of the basketball team for 4+ years, and also was trainer for the football team, student trainer, uh, and thought probably I'd go into orthopedic surgery. I did orthopedic surgery every summer for 3 years in medical school, and then went off to Baltimore and had a great innings there. We were in the Baltimore Bethesda area from 70 to 77 and did general surgery at Hopkins, did 2 years. Back then, everybody had, as Vietnam War, everybody had Berry Plan or Vietnam, or if you were a male, you owed the government 2 years of service. And it
yeah.
turned out that I was in what we call the yellow beret. So like at the 11th hour, I applied to the public health service and was accepted to do the National Cancer Institute surgery branch in Bethesda, Maryland. So I did 2 years of residency, went to Bethesda for 2 years, came back to Baltimore for another 3 or 4 years, and was supposed to stay on faculty at Hopkins and do thoracic oncology. When I was in Bethesda, we had my assignment of what I worked with. I was at a head and neck clinic for 2 years, did clinical for about 8 months, and did research. But we were doing a neoadjuvant therapy for squamous cell carcinoma of the head and neck, and we had
Right.
some positive for that. And that was before we were really doing it with esophageal cancer or lung cancer, which was what I was going to be doing had I stayed on. And for a variety of circumstances, which we can discuss, uh, was not at peace with buying a house and settling down. My granddaddy taught me that nobody owns a cow, but that the cow owns them. And if you buy a house and you get your kids in public schools or local schools and stuff, it's going to be hard to extricate you.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so
And I read that during your training years, shall we call it, you spent a few months with an interesting and intriguing man. I think that's what you're meant to say nowadays. Ronald Belsey.
I
Um,
was his last. I think I was his last registrar at French Hospital, right outside of Bristol. And then by age, he had to retire. But he also had a practice at a private hospital there.
mhm.
But the bottom line is, I spent 6 fascinating, wonderful months with Belsey. There was another attending there as well, but Belsey was that was the arrangement piece and everything that Skinner and uh, other people from the Hopkins program had Mark Oringer in particular, who went
Yeah.
on to Michigan and was a leader in American esophagectomies and stuff. So people like those individuals had been there. Yeah, he was a formative somebody. He was a genius, quite frankly, and a very interesting character for sure.
Yeah, there were, in those days, there were, in my very early years, I spent some time with a thoracic surgeon in Ireland who was president of the college. And, it was all like a big family thoracic surgery in those days because in the immediate post-war years, there was very little of it done. And so he worked with a guy called Bill Cleland, who was, a legend in, on the more eastern side of the UK. And he used to keep a file of all the patients around the country who needed a thoracotomy. And, he would tell my former boss, he'd say, "Oh, next week we're going to Portsmouth. Could you set it up?" And they'd go down to Portsmouth, and do 6 thoracotomies, for fairly futile attempts to cure lung cancer, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, the chain of sequence was that, he'd been, Bill Cleland was the second assistant at the King's pneumonectomy in Buckingham Palace, where they, George VI, had a pneumonectomy done. And they actually did it in Buckingham Palace. They set up an operating theater there. And they had to convene, he always used to tell the story that they had to convene the Privy Council in the middle of the operation to get their permission to cut his recurrent laryngeal nerve because, he had a very advanced cancer and because of his speaking arrangements or engagements, etc. But it's a little different nowadays. So they were quite legends, as you say, Mark Oringer and David Skinner, and they're all connected. And I think I saw somewhere one of your chiefs was Tom DeMeester.
He was chief resident when I was a PGY1, which we call them an interns in those days, in
Yeah.
junior assistant residents, and senior assistant residents, and chief residents and stuff. But yeah, I went in. Elkins was on one side, and he was went into cardiac, and DeMeester was. There were only 2 residents that finished in those days. It was actually an extra year that was really a junior faculty year. So I had DeMeester and Elkins had played football at Oklahoma. He was smooth as he could be. He was like a Hollywood movie star and very athletic and everything and very decisive. DeMeester was more of I won't say plotter, but he was more systematic and he wasn't as flashy as Elkins in many ways, but he really taught us because he insisted if we were going to get a consult from the chief resident of medicine, we just didn't send a consult. We read everything we could about that patient. We tried to expand our knowledge about that patient. And then we would invite the chief resident and say, X, Y, and Z, these are what we were thinking. What do you think? Help us make sure we're in the middle of the road. So he really was systematic and very, very thoughtful. And he made major contributions with the DeMeester score and all the stuff with pH testing. And his son's a very active thoracic surgeon right now in Portland, Oregon. And DeMeester was really important to me. I was a DeMeesterite instead of an Elkinsophile, though I like them both a lot, but I spent a lot of time with DeMeester.
Yeah, and when I went to upstate New York, my chairman there was Jeff Peters, who was,
So you were at Rochester. You were at Strong Memorial.
Correct. Yeah.
Migliore.
Yeah. Exactly.
Better.
Exactly. So, and he was the next generation down. The USC,
right. Yeah, he was
Hopkins, USC,
I
and that
him.
lot. So you said you were not at peace, and so this was one of the famous Yogi Berra forks in the road, and you had to take it. And you did not take the standard option.
Well, there's a history behind that to some extent. Well, first off, my dad was a Baptist preacher.
Mm-hmm.
So growing up, we had missionaries coming through our church. Some were medical, but most of them weren't. But there were medical missionaries that came through, a few. And then when my wife and I got married, we got married before we went to medical school. So we got married when we were like 21. And we basically said, we're not going to take a sabbatical on our spiritual or religious life. We'll go to church every Sunday. We got married March before we started medical school in September. And so when we started medical school, I saw a notice that said Christian Medical Society is going to meet on Tuesday night, 6 o'clock for 1 hour. And I said, why don't we do that? We won't go to Wednesday night prayer meeting. We'll count that as our Wednesday night prayer meeting kind of a thing. And we went there, and there were only like 12 of us. One had spent some time in Zaire, DRC, we call it now, and was planning to do part-time mission work. Another guy was a pulmonary fellow, and he was planning to go to Nigeria with the Southern Baptist Convention. And another lady who was a third-year medical student, Rebecca Naylor, was planning to go to India, and she actually went there for 30 or 35 years, and she went back to UT Southwestern and became the third-year clerkship coordinator and won an Association of Surgical Education National Teaching Award. So there were 3 people there in a group of 12 or 13 that were actually thinking about doing what we would call international or global surgery right now, but doing it through their church. So, you know, I went to medical school. I was a little bit naive. I thought you either went to community practice or you went into academics. But, you know, there's government, there's research, there's policy. There's so many different things you can do nowadays. You can go and work for the lawyers and different things like that. There are a lot of things you can do at the present time. But anyway, that seed was kind of planted. Then the next step was when I was a senior, we went to England and had a great time. So I spent one summer in Nashville doing orthopedics. I went to England. I went to, we had a terrific couple of rotations each of the summers and everything. And then between third and fourth year, I went and did orthopedics in London, Royal National Orthopedic Hospital. So I was really tracking along being an orthopedic surgeon. And when I got to Baltimore, in those days, you just had a PGY1 and PGY2 year, and then you decided to go into neurosurgery or colorectal, which didn't exist then, plastic surgery or something else like that. So because we had this 2-year commitment that was already set for 2 years after I got there, actually I got a call from the chair there to join the orthopedic residency, but I told him I had to go to Bethesda. I was 4 years away and would wait and see what happened and everything. But my final year of medical school, it was during the Vietnam War. New England Journal of Medicine basically essentially gave hard copies of medical journal to medical students for a trivial fee. And in the back of one of the New England journals, my 4th year of medical school, there was a letter to the editor. And it said, I'm the only physician in this part of Nigeria. They're like, I take care of like 1.5 million patients. My son has got X, Y, and Z disease. I'm going to have to take him to the States for care. I don't know when I'll be back. How about some of you bleeding heart liberals who are marching on Saturday against the war in Vietnam, getting off your butts and coming over here and helping some sick folks, marching on Saturday, going to your country club buffets on Sunday, come over here and help some of these sick folks. I actually cut that out, put it in my back pocket, went off, had a great innings at Hopkins, had a great innings at Bethesda, and I made all the interviews with the head of oncology. Briggs Baker was important to me. Dr. Zeidema was important to me, the head of medical oncology. I made all the tours. They took me to the golf courses, different things like that. So I was pretty well set, but I just didn't, I looked around Baltimore and they had really, really good surgeons standing in line to do what people would call minor procedures. I don't think there are any minor procedures, just minor surgeons, but that's what they would say. But I mean, we had a boatload of really great surgeons who were not that active clinically and everything. And I just said to my wife, I said, I don't feel right about this. I said, it was mathematics. Part of it was mathematics. It was numerator, denominator. How many surgeons were for how many population? In Baltimore, they had a lot of surgeons for a small population as opposed to some places in sub-Saharan Africa. I'd originally planned to go to medical school and then go back to Mississippi and try to address healthcare needs of the underserved, both the poor whites and the blacks, which were really a challenge. We only have 6 million people in Mississippi, but we jokingly say that the motto for the state of Arkansas was "Thank God for Mississippi." Sure. But Though actually there's an article in the New York Times yesterday about Mississippi has some things to teach the rest of the nation about education, which is interesting. But the bottom line is that I went in to talk to my professor, and he made all the difference in the world. So I got to know Zeidema real well because I've been there for a lot of years with him and everything. And he smoked a pipe. So I went in and I said, well, my wife and I have been thinking about it, praying about it. I told my wife, I said, why don't we go? And even if we just work for 3 years, which was kind of like the first tour, I said that would be a tenth of our projected 30-year career. So that way, if we don't like it, we'll come back. We've tied our career. And then if we don't like it, we can come back and we can go to the country club buffet. And I also gave her like security counsel right to veto anything if we get there and she's 6 months in a year and it's driving her crazy. We had 2 kids, first grader, second grader. I said, if you say we're coming home, we're coming home. So under those ground rules, she said, we need running water and I don't want to teach the kids. And so bottom line, I went and talked to Zeidema. I said, this is what we've been thinking. We've been praying about it, And this was one of the most important 3 minutes in my whole life. It turns out, for my whole vocation, which I prefer as opposed to career. He puffed on his pipe 2 or 3 times. He's now deceased. He looked up at the ceiling and he said, well, if I'm going to be out recruited, I'd rather be out recruited by God than anybody. And then he said, if it doesn't work out, if there's a coup, if somebody gets sick, when you have stateside assignment, let me know a year ahead of time. I will have a job for you for your furlough year, and you tell me if you want to be Baltimore City, Hopkins, or the VA. And he also said, as long as I'm chair, you have a job. So he was my security blanket, as it were. And that was very thoughtful. I said, well, I won't hold you to that, but I'm very grateful for it. So anyway, make a long story short, we went on through the Southern Baptist Convention, Foreign Mission Board, it was called then, International Mission Board, it's called now. And we ended up, I went to planning. I asked them, could we go to Kenya, because it had one of their people who had been on the field for 10 years that they had assigned to the University of Nairobi. And I thought that would be a great place to go, and I could go and join him and everything. They said, well, that's still an experiment with us. We don't know if we want to do that or not. Why don't you go and check with the people in West Africa? So I walked across the hall, talked to the people there, and I said, do you have it? I said, I don't want to go and do a lot of hernias. I want to go and train Nigerians or somebody to perform cases that need to be performed. I'm a surgical educator, sort of thing. And he said, first off, he offered me Nalerigu, Ghana. They say it's not the end of the world, but you can see it from there. And then I said, well, how many residents do they have there? And they said, they don't have any residents. And I said, well, who has some people in training? He said, well, in Abomashaw, they've got 4 people who are 1 year out of medical school. So it's like an intern. So Nigeria would be the place in West Africa that we have somebody that's got a training capability and facility. So that's what we ended up signing up for. It turned out that there was a library right across the street from the hospital that had been founded in 1907. And so when we finished residency, we went to seminary for 6 months, which was wonderful. Then we went to orientation for 3 months. And then in April of 78, Maggie and I and a first grader and a second grader, we went to Abomashaw, Nigeria, which is in the southwest Yoruba area. So you fly into Lagos, and it's like two hours by road north through Ibadan, which is one of the largest black cities in the world. Yeah. Lagos is a state, Ibadan's a city. But anyway, and the first medical school in Nigeria was in Ibadan, 1948. So we settled down there, and we spent 15 years there, but we would do 3 years there, 1 year back at the VA in Baltimore. So I did a 3-1, 3-1, 3-1, 3. And 3 or 4 things happened. In one, the denomination I was with took 2 giant steps and moved to the right, joined the John Birch Society. I was kind of a beer drinking Baptist with a lowercase b, and I was not truth in advertising. And we had people that we had trained up who were ready to take leadership roles in the hospital. Yeah. But in the Yoruba, they have lots of quotes and aphorisms and everything. One of them is, why do we need a new chief if the old chief is still here? So I was like a chair that was blocking the ascension of younger people coming along behind. So we decided, my my dad was going blind. My mother was getting dementia. Maggie was an only child. Her father died our first year of medical school. So we said, why don't we just go back for a year, reevaluate, see where we might go next, things like that. And Hopkins and Maryland, when they built a new VA, it was going to be a University of Maryland facility, whereas the VA I was in was a Hopkins facility. So I was going to have to change faculty appointments. And as we were driving down, and I was visiting professor at Vanderbilt while we were on the I-81, I thought for about an hour about it. And I said, Maggie, what do you think if we transfer to Vanderbilt, if they have a position that way would be an hour from your mother and 6 hours from my folks, as opposed to 13 or 14 hours? She said, that'd be great. So I talked to the chair. He said, if you want to come for a year, that's easy. I can get you a spot at the VA for a year. If you want to come for 20 years, that's a problem. So we went there, and make a long story short, after I'd been there for 2 years, they asked me to be program director in general surgery. And that was a perfect fit because that's actually what I've been doing in Nigeria. And we ended up staying 23 years. So when I turned in 2009, I was 65. I told my two chairs, I had a meeting with them, called a meeting with them, and I said, I'm giving you a 5-year warning. When it gets to be 2014, I'm going to resign as program director. I don't think a 70-year-old needs to be talking to 25 and 30 years old. You don't need, you need to get some younger blood in. So you've got 5 years to find somebody, and I'll stay here that long as if health's good and you want me to and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, so I had a great relationship with my folks, and I had a wonderful time. I would take my vacation time and go back to Nigeria for 2 or 3 weeks, or to the West Africa College of Surgeons every year, really to water friendships. But I'd often take an orthopedic surgeon, a urologic surgeon, a ophthalmic surgeon, a plastic surgeon. We would do a CME course for 2 weeks using the anesthesia, nursing infrastructure that we had at our hospital there, as opposed to bringing somebody there here where they had C-arms and CTs and different things like that. So I watered friendships and went back to sub-Saharan Africa every year for a fortnight or 3 weeks or something like that from my VA duties. So that worked out well.
Yesterday I was talking to a newly minted program director, and I said to him, a couple of things that I've learned about program directors, having been one myself and watched a number of them over many years. One was that, the important thing for a program director not to get confused about is the difference between being a program director and the resident's friend. You're not the resident's friend per se. You can be friendly, but your primary job is being the program director, and it's more like a parenting issue. And the other thing that sometimes one sees is where an individual becomes defined by being program director. And I guess it's a bit like what you commented about, when there's, why change the chief if there's a good chief there already? But somebody ends up being a program director for 30 years, and really they don't have another identity. And that's quite challenging, because, as you say, you didn't want to go beyond 70, but whatever the numbers are, the numbers don't really matter. The issue is it good to bring new blood in? Is it good, et cetera, et cetera? Do you have any thoughts based on your many years as program director on those two things?
Yeah, I think, they used to quote, if you take a general surgery job or surgery RC job kind of thing, you're supposed to do the duration of the residency plus a year. So when they offered me the job as program director, I said, I won't take the title, but I'll do the work. Somebody else has to have the title, because I'm thinking about getting back to Africa. And I did that for like 5 or 6 years until we got a new chair. And he said, I'm not taking the title. You're going to keep the title. And so he transferred the title to me, but I was called the coordinator for like the first 5 years, but I basically was program director. But the other thing is that I was a full-time VA surgeon. I was 8/8 VA surgeon. I didn't have to generate RVUs, and the VA is a terrific place to teach. So I had 3 jobs really before it was all over. I had a VA job, a full-time VA job. I had the program director job, and then I had a medical school position as well as a master clinical teacher. So I actually had 3 salary streams, and I worked about 80 hours a week. I mean, we always overestimate how many hours we work, but I
Yeah.
basically was kind of a 24/7, always available kind of person if I was in country, except for maybe Tuesday afternoons when I tried to get a mulligan with our third child who came. My wife raised the first two, then we had an 11-year gap. So on the third child, I had a chance to have a role. So I would take Tuesday afternoons off and spend those with him. And that was really important to me going backwards. But the bottom line, one of the things is that I think if you have a passion for it and it lights your fire and it keeps you young and it catalyzes you, that's one thing. If you're overwhelmed by getting ready for site visits and all the documentation and all the administration, then I think that, you got to know when to say when kind of a thing. And I'm still a program director right now. I'm right now in my retirement. I tell people tell me I flunked retirement 3 times, but when we
Yeah.
left our most recent position where I was in Botswana for 3 years as chair of surgery, uh, 2 weeks after we got back to the States, I became the academic dean for the Pan-African Academy of Christian Surgeons. And that's essentially, Bill Wood had asked me to do that a couple of years before, but I said I got a full-time job. I can't do it. But what it amounts to is that we have like 20 programs in 13 different institutions in 11 countries. And so I've got like 20 something program directors that if they have problems, they will consult me. And I tell people I've made all the mistakes you can make, and maybe I can help you not make those same mistakes. Getting back to, you're not supposed to, you're not, are you a friend or friendly? I think it's a little bit of both. I maintain that I wanted to treat those residents. So I had kids that were in their 30s and kids that, well, 20s and 10 and those sorts of ages. I wanted to treat them the way I hope somebody would treat my kids. That's the way I treated it, which was for their best interest. I wanted to hold the bar high.
Sure.
I wanted to play as good a game as I talk, and I wanted to not be a hypocrite. And I wanted to have, and I had a sign up on the top of my 2 offices. I had an office at the VA and I had an office at Vanderbilt Department of Surgery, and it said expectations. And I would, when they first came in, I would point to that sign and I said, I'm going to have high expectations for you. I want you to have high expectations in this program. And if there's things that you need for us to adapt to help you, you let me know. But I'm here to see that you succeed. If you succeed, I succeed. If you struggle and don't succeed, then that's negative karma for me. So basically, I tell people, and I really love what I did. And so in Baltimore, somewhere along the way, when I was back giving a talk to Baltimore Academy of Surgeons, I was in a room with 30 or 40 people. They were all mostly older white males. And I basically looked around. Everybody in that room was a millionaire but me. My wife and I were getting what we call support. So I was working 80 hours a week. Maggie was working 50 hours a week at the seminary as a librarian. And we were getting support. They were giving us a house. They were giving us a car. And they gave us a little bit of money. We got $20K. That's what I got, the same thing as that the maintenance guy did that finished high school. But it was enough to live off on. We actually saved some money. But I looked around the room and I said, I'm the best paid surgeon in this room. I just get paid in different currency. And what I tell people now is, when, like, I just visited Morgantown in West Virginia, and I was there with Carl Schmidt, one of our residents. And I honestly feel like that those residents are my progeny, and those residents are my non-taxable income.
Yeah.
So, one of my friends said, the goal is to live below your means. And that's not necessarily true of everybody in the U.S. these days. That's not the mantra that we face with the materialism that we all have. But the bottom line is that we've been incredibly blessed with good health, healthy kids, healthy grandkids. I almost sometimes feel a survivor guilt equivalent in the sense that I don't have a special needs child, because several of my colleagues do, and it really just alters your whole career and your whole life, for heaven's sakes. But anyway, we feel very blessed to get to do what we get to do, and we'll do it, for a while, and there'll be a time when we need to say enough is enough.
Well, you have, as you say, you've failed dismally at retiring.
I tell people I've got a half-time job now. I'm working 40 hours a week. I do like 5 Zooms a day, and then I traveled to sub-Saharan Africa 6 or 8 times. I go do talks, and like in April, it was wonderful. But in April, excuse me, in April, we had like 5 different meetings. One was in Toronto, and the rest were around the states. But I was like in my house 5 nights. And May was
Yeah.
I was only gone for 2 nights, and then fixing to go to Tanzania in another couple of weeks. But yes.
So in theory, I know it's theory, not practice, but in theory, you function out of Nashville.
This is a house that we moved into in 1993. And so
Yeah.
we kept it as a free Airbnb. I had a resident stay in it for a year, had some missionaries stay in it for a while, had residents, parents that would be here if there was a health issue or new children, stuff like that. So basically, we kept our house. We didn't want to go through all the legal stuff and charge fees and stuff. We had a lady that's from our church and everything would come once a week, water the flowers and clean things and make sure no water's leaking and stuff. So we had really a good support team, and we used it and still do when we're gone. But yes.
So in the now you're doing what you do, working very busily, 80 hours a week or whatever it might be.
Well, now it's 40, I guess.
Well, as you say, a half-time job. But you're, as much as anything else, you're doing it because you're available and there's an unmet need in that space. What's your stance on, I've asked a lot of people in these interview series, what do they think about the chairman who doesn't retire until they're 84? Again, back to what you said, if there's a chief, why do you need a new chief? Are you a believer in, mandating the fact that, you should have limited tenure to let someone else, have a go? Your situation's slightly different at the moment, but obviously, but in the standard model, do you think people should just move on, or rather than clinging on for grim death?
Well, I don't know about hanging on for grim death or not. I think it's probably an individual decision. We have so many legal things right here. ACS. I think the mantra I hear from the ACS is quality and safety, and I think that's a great logo to be focusing on and have as your goal. I think that as far as should I retire and make room for somebody? The short answer is that I'm just basically I volunteered to do this job for no title, no salary. So it's not like I'm keeping somebody unemployed or something like that. They wanted somebody that was older.
What if you were Dan Beecham, the late Dan Beecham was a very good friend of mine, but what if you were the 70-year-old chair of Vanderbilt? That's the one I mean. Should that person step aside and say, let someone else have a go?
I think it certainly would be considered, and I think 70 is a good number. You could pick a number. It used to be 65. Mandatory retirement in Nigeria was 50. I think they changed it to 55, but life expectancy 20 years ago was related to that and everything. And life is hard there, quite frankly. So yeah, I think that knowing when to say when is important. Again, I hate to put things in concrete rules that you have to do this. A lot of times you have to get a physical and a mental and all this kind of stuff every year if you go a year beyond or so. One of my close friends, you may know, Walter Merrill, who's like Mr. Integrity, but he and I basically had a pact with each other that both of us would be willing to tell the other one it was time to say when, kind of a thing, that we don't want to go beyond. So I think what happens is, like, I quit doing clinical work except for giving my opinion and going to conferences and stuff when we moved to Botswana in 2018 because I had too much stuff on the plate because they needed to go to the theater and I didn't need to go to the theater. So I think you can give up the clinical work, but like Beecham, the latter years of his life, now deceased, he still focused on doing his research because they were on some hot stuff regarding, I think you're a colorectal surgeon. I mean, he's very interested in oncogenesis of colorectal surgery. He's got a couple of his progeny, like Josh Smith at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and there's
Yeah.
another lady here that's just finishing that is Marincula Smith, who's a Paula Marincula Smith. She did a 4-year PhD. Josh did a 4-year PhD. She's fixing to go to MD Anderson, but they're doing all this SCHMAD4 and all this. I think he had that was his life, was to try to make progress with colorectal cancer. And I think he's got knowledge and skills that other people didn't have. And so Seth Tarp, took his place in an appropriate time. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Dr. Sawyer's tried to resign 3 different times, and the vice chancellor wouldn't let him do it. So I think each situation is a little bit different.
Yeah. So in your, I hesitate to use the term spare time, but if you were to have theoretical spare time, do you have hobbies and passions outside of what has been your mainstream
I think it's
passion?
really important. You brought up that point the other day, you could get monocular vision and just be a grind and everything. So I mentioned that I had been manager and trainer and different things like that. So I'm like a little bit of a college sports junkie. When I went to college, I'd been an assistant manager for basketball in Mississippi, and we went to the state championship and things like that. I tell people basketball is my passion, and I basically said I may be short, but I sure am slow. But I was never going to be, playing and get to it that way and everything. So when I went to college, my branch point decision was I'm going to be a chemistry major and go and be a high school chemistry teacher and a basketball coach, or would I go to medical school? Well, working with the sports teams and the orthopedic surgeon and all that kind of stuff, I said, let me go to medical school, and I did. That's that sort of thing. So I have season tickets for Vanderbilt football, and we basically hemorrhage in the fall as a rule, playing all these SEC schools. But basketball, we actually made it as high as number 2 in the country, and we had All-Americans. I had 2 people at my wedding that were members of our team who both played professional basketball, and others that went in and did a lot of other good stuff and got drafted and things like that. But we had we won the SEC, and back then only one team from each conference could go. It was a field of 32 for basketball back in the mid 70s and everything, and the mid 60s. But anyway, I have football tickets, men's basketball tickets, women's basketball tickets, and baseball tickets. So like Vanderbilt just won the SEC baseball. We're actually playing tomorrow night, Eastern Illinois. But I am a sportsaholic, and I know a lot about SEC and the college sports. The other thing is that I love music. I listen to music a lot. I sing in my church choir. It's a highlight of the week for like Wednesday night. And we have an hour and a half Wednesday night, a half hour Sunday morning. Then we sing most of the time on Sunday morning. And our choir master, to her credit, says, we are not here to perform. We're here to lead in worship. If you think about an hour of Protestant service, it's about half music.
Yes.
Sort of a thing. But so music, I have lots of friends. I read voraciously. I'm always reading something, sort of stuff. So I have a lot of things that I think. Whenever in my prayer life, I think I have a lot of things I'm grateful for, but one of them is my thyroid gland. God gave me a really good thyroid gland, and people always want to know what's my T4, but it's normal. It's been checked. But anyway, I'm kind of high on life.
Now, I have to say that I have one criticism of you, based on one of your mentees, Jesse Wright, who was with me for a few years here, and before he went to what
Memphis,
he calls,
he's in Memphis now.
Yes, what he calls Tennessee, and I call Mississippi, just to annoy
he goes
him.
down. He does go down and spend part of his time in Mississippi.
So
with H.F. Mason, he spends time with H.F. Mason, which is one of our former residents.
Exactly. So Jesse has this unfortunate habit of wearing bow ties, and this is something. So my question is, did he learn that from you, or did you learn it from someone else?
Well, his dad is actually a faculty member here, and he was he was a chair. He was on the, he did his residency at Mass General. His dad wears bow ties. So he may have probably well gotten it from his dad. But
Yeah.
what happened with me is that back when I was an intern, my first rotation was in the emergency room in Baltimore in July of 70. We wore a shirt and a tie. And if you had a long tie on and you lean over, it'd get in the wound or it'd get
Oh,
on the
sure. Yeah.
different things like that. And you ended up tucking in the shirt. So one of the ways to deal with that was just do a bow tie. So that's really kind of what led me to the bow tie. And once I got it, it was something that I liked. And it's pretty Southern. And
Yes.
I'm pretty Southern, even though I lost all my accent. But
Mhm.
it's no, but I know actually I was with Jesse within the last month. And
Yeah,
I see his dad all the time.
he's
His
a
dad,
good
Kelly Wright, is an incredible surgeon and really a close friend, and his mother as well. They're just a great family.
yeah, no, Jesse's a good guy. He texts me most weeks with some new and entertaining disaster case he's inherited, so
I'm glad
various
he's
things.
asking for advice. I think
Oh
that's a
no.
sign of strength.
He always has done, and he texted me just 2 days ago about something. So now, not that you're proposing to fall over any day soon. How would you like to be remembered, and how do you think you will be remembered?
Well, one of the talks I give, I talk about Dick Kiefer, who was my father in surgery. If I had a father in surgery, it's a guy named Dick Kiefer. And nobody outside of Baltimore's heard of him, probably. He went to Franklin and Marshall, went to Hopkins Medical School. He came through the Hopkins residency. And in 1952, his first job, he went to a vacant field and actually helped them physically build the Lock Raven VA, which is the VA that I worked at.
Yeah,
So he was a lifetime VA surgeon.
right.
And he would go to clinic with us. He would operate with us. He was available. He was feisty. He asked a gazillion questions. He held the bar really, really high. Uh, and so he, so I became a very close friend to him. His son, I got to know his son really well. And I tried to stay in touch with him, going back and forth and all this kind of stuff. So his son, Robert, called me one day, and it was a day late because I would have gone. But he basically said my dad had moved to Asheville, North Carolina, and he had some health issues and stuff, and he had just died. And I said, "Oh my gosh, I wish you'd have called me earlier." Da 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 da. Because I'd gone by Asheville and seen them several times. So I called up John Cameron to let him know that Dick Kiefer had died. And when I talked to John Cameron, then the chair at Hopkins, uh, there was a pause. And then his first comment was, he taught us all how to operate. And two other things I would say about that. So in one of my talks in one of the papers that we wrote, I ended up telling that story and showing Kiefer's picture and showing Cameron's picture and Cameron's quote. And I said, that would be a great epitaph.
Yeah,
And so two things I would say, there's a great quote from like 1912 that says, a good surgeon knows when to operate, a
yeah,
great surgeon knows when not to operate. But based on that paper, I've asked, what do I want as an epitaph? Well, I maybe just have a plaque for when I was born, when I died, or not even that. But if I did, I've thought about that, and I would like the word Barnabas, which means son of encouragement. I would like to be known as an encourager. I want to build people up instead of put them down. I want to make sure that they practice to a high standard, and I want to keep the academic bar high. So if you ask me what I want to be remembered for, it was that I encourage people to reach their as full of potential as they could or should or were capable of. And one of the things I'm most proud about is that we've got I've got a lot of things I'm proud of, and I'm blessed by, like, I won the marriage lottery. So let me just be sure to make sure I put that in there somewhere. And I hope everybody else does too. But I have won the marriage lottery. I am a kept man, and any success I have is related to Maggie Johnson Tarpley. But I think that the number of our residents that have gone into surgical education, that's very, very important to me. Several of our residents have gone into global or missionary surgery. Not all missionaries. Some are gone into global surgery, non-missionary, through NGOs and different things like that. But I think that my relationship with my residents, I consider them. I have like surgical daughters and surgical sons, and some you're closer to than others, obviously. But I have a whole progeny, like 150 or 70 or 200, depending if you count all the ones in Africa and everything, of folks that we've helped train, and they're my currency, quite frankly. I mean,
Right.
that's what turns me on. That's what lights me up.
And if you could sit down and with the 1969 John Tarpley, and now today sit down with that young John Tarpley and say, listen, there's a couple of things I wish I'd known, and I'm going to tell you. What do you think they would be?
I would like to have been a better husband and a better father, especially for the first two kids. I worked probably too hard when I was in Abomashaw. Uh, I had things that I did with the kids and everything, but I could probably. My wife put up with a lot of crap. I mean, she basically raised those first two kids because I was in Baltimore, going through residency and stuff. Even when we went to Bethesda for 2 years, in retrospect, it turns out she was taking care of the kids the whole time. And so Saturdays and Sundays were lighter when I was at the National Cancer Institute and everything.
Yeah.
But yet on Sunday afternoon, a Saturday afternoon, I would go off and play basketball with the guys in the gym at the cancer center at the NCI building 10. Well, it turns out that should have been her afternoon off,
Yeah.
not my afternoon off. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's, and again, I had a better chance with the third son to put in more time with him than I did, because I saw that that's something that we have a great relationship with all of our kids. But I mean, that's something I could have been a better father and when
I
I was in a
always
barbershop, when I got there, go ahead.
I was going to say, I always say, surgeons are better grandparents than parents.
Well, I don't see them as much as I'd like to, but
Mm.
I'm not in control of that. We actually just bought tickets to go. I haven't taken vacations. One of the mistakes I made, my idea of a vacation when we were in Nigeria was to go to the West Africa College of Surgeons, let the kids swim in the swimming
Yeah.
pool while I was going to a meeting.
Yeah.
So until I got back in '93, we almost never took a vacation. That was a mistake. And now, like today, we just bought tickets to go to spend 2 weeks in Switzerland on Boxing Day and the first. So let me just say, at one time, we had our senior son lives in Switzerland. He's a Swiss citizen now because he married a Swiss. Our number two son was living in China because his wife's a PhD in Chinese, and she goes and works for 6 months or a year or something like that there. And our third son was living in Canada. So it's not like everybody's like within a 2-state area of us. I mean, they're all over right now. They're from San Diego to Geneva. And then our son that was in Canada for a decade, he's moved back to Gambier, Ohio, which is just north of Columbus. But our family, they once asked a missionary kid, were they more comfortable in the States or in Nigeria? And they thought for a second and said, in the airplane.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They picked up that wanderlust from you, obviously,
But when I went to Abomashaw, I wanted to practice really good medicine and everything. And it turned out we didn't have an anesthesiologist, and I became an anesthesiologist. I'd had an anesthesia rotation and a pathology rotation during my residency, which was a longer residency than most, and everything. But basically, I was on call for general surgery one night at 3. I was on call for anesthesia one night at 3, and I was on call for OBGYN backup call one night at 6. So I was on call 25 nights out of 30, and we operated almost every night.
Yeah.
And when the kids went off to school, they were 10 or 12 hours away. That's the only time that I was not on call, is when I was in Jos, Nigeria, where the kids were going to school and everything. And when we got back to the gate, they would have like 3 charts that I needed to go see right now, coming back in. So I think that I worked too hard.
Yeah.
I would go in the morning, make rounds. I didn't come home for lunch. I'd come home for supper, put the kids to bed, then I'd go back and make what I call howdy rounds, which I really loved. for 30 or so minutes, 40 minutes at night, just going around seeing the patients, talking to them, making sure there's no catastrophes that people had missed or no new admissions. And it could be, but by the time I got home, Maggie was asleep, the boys were asleep. And so I was an absentee father, and I think I could have done better on that front.
It's a common story, I fear. So in the in the coming years, do you have any real bucket list items?
Well, we're going to tackle some of those. We sat down these first. I signed on to do like 3 years with PACS, and one of the reasons I did it because the person I work with in FAR works way too hard, and I wanted to help alleviate some of his burden and kind of job share with him some. His name's Keir Thielander. And one of the reasons I took the job is because, one, I believe what PACS is doing, which is capacity building. But two, it was because I had a really good relationship with this guy, and I thought it'd be fun to partner with him for 3 years or so. So right now, health willing, we're supposed to work till the end of 2024. Maggie says we can extend the year if I want to, but one of the things I wanted to do, nature is really important, and like green and outdoors, and there's people that say, nature's God's autographed and different things like that. And anyway, there's a lot of things, but Jackson, Wyoming is like one of my favorite places in the world to go. And it's just good for my soul to be in the Tetons and just to walk and be out in nature like that, pristine, clean. And the other is my son-in-law's, my son's father-in-law lives in a chalet in the Bernese Oberland Alps in a place called Kiental. And so we go visit our son, but I always go to Kiental and take several days or so there because it kind of is like going for a revival. It's really good for my soul. So we're planning to travel. We actually got a car. We left our 65 Mustang and our 94 Camry here. We had somebody starting them and stuff, but they both had trouble when we got back. Maggie got a used RAV4, but the idea is we're going to travel to Jackson, and we're going to do that in September. And we're going to spend some more time in Switzerland with our son and in the Bernese Alps. And so we're doing that over Boxing Day, going to do. So I'm going to try to take more vacations, but there's a lot of state parks in the U.S. Tennessee's got great state parks. I think every state parks. And there's places I want to go to Acadia and Maine. We love Canada. So we're going to hopefully,
you have plenty to do,
God willing, and we can drive. We're going to take that RAV4 and try to see some of the country.
Yeah. Well, listen, Tarp, it's been, I don't know about you. I'm kind of exhausted now, having listened to that life story, and I've just listened to it. I haven't lived it. But it's been a wonderful.
You've got race cars. You do something, man.
Sure.
I'm looking at all these cars on your wall and on your table there.
That's nothing compared to your story. But I really appreciate you taking the time. We will. This will get released in probably a month or so. When it does, I'll be sure to let you know, of course, so you can look at it on. And in the meantime, look at some of the other interviews. There's people like Jeff Matthews and Barry Salke.
What a star he is for heaven's sake, and his wife. And they're another team. We're team Tarpley, but the Matthews are team.
Yeah. And there's. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.